All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo Rice, and my correspondent.
Simone.
All right, so today we have a very interesting show. We know there is a lot going on in the world today. And the burning question that a lot of people have is, how do the young people feel about all that's going on? Generation Z, primarily Generation Z, which is pretty much the youngest generation now. So the burning question is, how do they feel? What they have to say about it? Things of that magnitude. So today's guest is actually a young man that I was introduced to about 4 or 5 years ago by a friend of a friend. And it took about a 5-year spin. But everybody knows me. Y'all know if I have a guest on the show, I've watched them. So I've watched them matriculate. I've watched them grow. I've watched them do great things. I believe in timing. So I'm very honored to have this young man on today. He is an amazing young man. He is one of the youngest advocates that I know. So I am so proud to have him on today. So we're going to say hello to Mr. Jared Sawyer Jr. Sir, how's it going today?
I'm wonderful. How you doing today?
I'm good. It's actually sunny in ATL, so we'll see if that holds up because we just never know these crazy weather patterns and all stuff going on. So
yeah, I need it too. I don't like bad weather at all.
Same.
Yeah, I'm not. Rain is not my thing, and rain's been trying to sneak up on us, which is not my thing. But I digress. We're gonna settle on this last day. I don't think it's supposed to rain today. We're gonna settle on that last. But it's all good. So in this, sir, I want you to introduce yourself to the people, tell everybody a little bit about you, and we're going to get right into some things.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Jared Sawyer Jr., and the biggest gist of it is that I just love God and I love people. I've been loving God all of my life ever since I can remember. I accepted the Lord into my heart at a young age and started preaching when I was 5, and then shortly afterwards got licensed and ordained, and God's opened up some doors for me to author some books and to bless other lives in other ways, and just grateful for the opportunity to be connecting with God's people and to just serve and do what I can to make the world a better place,
Awesome.
All right. So Simone, so Jared is no stranger to having conversations about what's going on in the world. So we're going to have, I don't want to say fun, because there's nothing fun going on in the world right now, with what we're all dealing with. But we're going to get into what's going on in the world today. So Simone, what is on the rundown?
So we're going to talk about the protests for sure, the protests that have become global, about police brutality and about the treatment of unarmed Black bodies in this country. They spread to London and South Africa. I think we talked about London the last time we spoke on Friday, but they've definitely spread and it's become a global phenomenon, Italy as well. So we'll talk about the protests. We'll talk about what happened in Atlanta over the weekend, what we can expect this week as well. Legally, we'll cover some of that background just because that's a big part of this too. And then we'll also talk about the George Floyd case itself and the developments there with that officer. And then we'll follow that up with a little bit of COVID news. We are still in the middle of the pandemic, so we'll talk a little bit about COVID news. There's a financial update today about student loans that's a little bit more optimistic that we can talk about. And then SpaceX from Elon Musk, one of our favorite major tech CEOs, between you and I, Ricardo, that is. And the historic space launch over the weekend too. So it's a little bit of bright news. Maybe we can end with that as we get into that conversation. So,
all right. Wherever you want to start, I'll let you start. Wherever you want to go.
Okay. So I'm glad to hear that this is really important for you too, Jared. So just to give everybody a little bit of background if they haven't been following anything, which I think was kind of hard to escape, but protests have been in over 47 states, documented protests from CNN, and now in multiple countries around the world, stemming from a video that went viral last Tuesday of George Floyd's murder by Officer Derek Chauvin. He has been charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But the protests that have happened have been pretty historic. So, the president's weighed in, and in every state, governors have weighed in as well. There were National Guard troops in many of those cities, especially the major cities, San Francisco, Boston, et cetera. 5 people did lose their lives as a result of those protests, including a security officer. This was in Oakland who was overseeing one of the protests. None of the others appear to be directly officer involved, but police arrested 2,500 people across the country. In Atlanta, there was 221 arrests between Friday and Sunday, 64 yesterday, 157 arrests on Saturday. Most of those arrests are obstruction charges, so that's a misdemeanor. Other times disturbing the peace, those sorts of ordinance violations. It's been kind of a way that a lot of the country has come together in other senses. Lots of all the major tech CEOs, Apple, Google, et cetera, have talked about what's going on, what happened with George Floyd. When you've got people like Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh on the same side as major Democratic leaders and tech CEOs, you know that the whole country's pretty much united on what's going on, and it was really sickened by what happened with George Floyd. So businesses have weighed in on this, but there was also a fair amount of destruction. There was property damage in the city of Atlanta. George Floyd's brother has since come out and called for peace with regard to the protests and said that he doesn't want any violence in the memory of his brother, that wasn't what his brother was about. And Mayor Lance Bottoms in a press conference over the weekend, echoed similar sentiments. This is Atlanta. We don't want to tear down our own city. We want to be careful about these sorts of things. And Bernice King made similar remarks. She said that her father's words had been misconstrued. There's a big meme going around with Martin Luther King, a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. about riots being the voice of the unheard. And she wanted to make sure people understood that that's not a justification for writing, and that's not who he was. He believed in civil disobedience, and that's what we should be doing in his name. And so it was a really great press conference. If you didn't hear Killer Mike's remarks, I put them on my IGTV. I reposted them because they were really profound. But big questions kind of arise, and maybe this is what we can talk about. Big questions about who the protesters are. There was a lot of reports about different cities, especially in Minneapolis, that out of like the 47 arrests during one night, 40 of those people were from out of town. In Atlanta, witnessed something very similar over the weekend. A lot of folks who were doing a lot of the looting, and the brick throwing, and tearing down the Target and Buckhead and things like that were not necessarily Atlanta residents or Clayco residents or Fulton County residents or from the general metro area. And President Trump and others have, come up with lots of different, there's clips floating around about Atlanta, Dallas, and elsewhere, that these are paid organizers, that they're from the far left, that they're George Soros funded, that they came together to decide, we're going to create some destruction because there's protests going on, and so we're just going to sabotage it. In Portland, I think 10 different looters were arrested who've been throwing bricks into like Gucci stores, Louis Vuitton stores, all Caucasian American for the record. So a big question has kind of arisen, I think, around who the protesters are, who's doing the peaceful protesting, who's doing the rioting and the looting. And then other questions have arisen about like just the police response. Depending on who you ask, the police have been very restrained and very tame in kind of what they've had to deal with, but there has been damage that's occurred. Use of tear gas and rubber bullets is most common, but that did blind one reporter in Minneapolis who received a rubber bullet, I guess, to her face. And a lot to talk about there. I'd love to just hear kind of everyone's first thoughts, what they saw over the weekend, especially if you saw any of what was going on in Atlanta. Like, Jared, what's kind of your sentiment about what's happened here?
Yeah, I knew that it was only a matter of time before protests were to begin here in Atlanta. Atlanta is the birthplace of the civil rights movement back in the 1950s and 60s. And there's a spirit here of resistance that I think is very well admired, that puts Atlanta at the forefront of visuality before everyone in the entire country. So even though Minnesota is where everything happened, it seems as though all eyes are right here in Atlanta, Georgia. We saw what happened at the CNN Center, the demonstration beginning over there. And things did begin very peacefully. The organizers, I know many of them, I spoke with many of them, actually saw and spoke with one of them yesterday. And it did begin very peacefully. We did have folks who were agitators and chose that they wanted to move beyond the cause and just kind of realize the opening that was there for them to loot and riot because they knew that in the light of everything that's going on, that the police were not going to retaliate in the way that perhaps they would, let's say, a few days before, a few weeks before. We definitely are really distressed by that reality that those people even were in the crowd, let alone got, so in tuned that they got to that forefront of everything, lighting police cars and destroying private property and public property. It was very disturbing to see people in the streets, even where I live, up the street from me. I realized when someone had texted me and told me that one of the jewelry stores was being looted, and I was like, oh man, that's up the street from me. So just knowing that my community, because it's not just that, oh, it's just the city of Atlanta, it's the city of Atlanta. Knowing that it's my community and all those different things happen. But even though I'm very disturbed by what I saw and hated to see so many folks being violent versus just protesting as they originally were, I don't blame them. I know folks are fed up, I hope they stop looting and being violent, because I don't believe violence is the answer. But I understand why they're doing what they're doing, because we've been saying Black Lives Matter since 2012, and it's 2020. And folks wouldn't agree to even say that 2012 Black Lives Matter, because it wasn't all lives matter, or the blue lives matter. And it's not that only Black Lives Matter, it's that Black Lives Matter too. And so many Black Americans are just hurting, and they're in pain. They feel ignored. And like you said, Dr. Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, a mentor of mine, said, a riot is the language of the unheard. That was her father's words. So the message that I believe that this generation is speaking, and has been speaking for the past 8 years strong, since Trayvon Martin, that has not been listened to apparently, is that we're not even living, we're just surviving. And I think people are just fed up, and they're like, we're just tired of surviving. We wanna go ahead and live.
Yeah. Ricardo, what do you have to say?
Oh God. Somebody asked me a question. I had a conversation with, people ask me all the time stupid stuff, but a friend of mine asked me a question. She was like, do you think that we'll ever get to a place where we can hold the police responsible for these kinds of incidents? And I thought about it, and I told her, I said, the issue is immunity. Public officials are typically enraveled in a certain level of immunity, which I understand. Yeah, they are entangled in this level of immunity that when you really sit down and think about it, it's very dangerous to unravel that immunity. And I think that's where we're kind of stuck at. It's like, okay, well, it's more than just punishing everybody, because you really can't just get to the bad, but it's more of, how do we hold law enforcement's feet to the fire without unraveling their immunity, which they do need. And I use the example of saying to her, I was like, okay, so imagine this. A police officer is called to a domestic violence situation. He gets there, there's this 6'5" guy, 280 pounds, beating on his wife. The police officer is about 5'11", maybe 170 soaking wet, maybe 180 soaking wet. In that moment, he has to make a decision, literally in that moment. Do I shoot this guy? Do I tase this guy? If I tase him and it doesn't faze him because he's really big, is he going to attack me? Is he going to kill his wife if I don't do anything? These are the kinds of decisions they have to make. And I'm not saying all the time, but these are the kind of high-level positions or scenarios they get put in all the time. So let's say he shoots the guy. And, people on the sidelines go, well, that was too much. You have to shoot him. But in that moment, he had to make all these decisions in that moment. So when you look at it like that, to me, to completely absolve their immunity, I think is too much. We just can't do it. But we've got to find a way to kind of cut into it, to say, okay, we get it, but now your duty of care, we're making it higher. So, you guys will have to take extra classes. You guys will have to, do some other things that you're not accustomed to doing, so that we can make sure that in those kinds of situations, you have made a good, clear, concise decision, because we prepared you to be able to do so. But I think it really boils down to this immunity thing. We got to look at, how do we kind of get into it without absolving it, because they do kind of need it for what they do. And I think that's what I've been kind of thinking about the whole weekend, because that's really what this boils down to. As far as the riots go, look, when they hit Phipps Plaza, that's when I was kind of like, okay, now we got looters. Because, you know, if you're starting here and you go all the way down to Fifth Plaza, and next thing you're breaking into Gucci and you're breaking it, because everybody knows Fifth Plaza is the expensive mall. So for you to be down there breaking glasses and robbing and looting, some of them were just on a mission. They saw an opportunity, they took it. You know, my question is, when the riot is done, you know, and because I feel like riots are typically designed to kind of garner an audience of people that they're not used to getting to. So when we get this audience, what do we have to say? You know, everybody's saying we want justice for the police, and that's great. But what's beyond if we get them all convicted? What's beyond that? You know, have we talked about legislation that's been sitting on senators and Congress people's desks? You know, have we looked into criminal reform, which is what Simone does, what you do? Have we looked at serious criminal reform legislation? Who has this knowledge? Who's been looking into these things so that because we are kind of getting this national and global stage right now, who's ready to speak when we actually are given the podium? Who's ready to speak and say, this is what we've been looking at. This is what we've been working behind the scenes. You know, this is what we got. Who's ready to do that? That's my fear. We're getting the global stage, but is anybody ready to really say what African Americans, you know? And that's kind of where my head is. You know, is anybody ready to say that? Because
so
I haven't seen.
They definitely are, but so here's the thing, and I know we only have so many more minutes to cover this, but the thing about the riots and that we have to keep in mind is that these are civilians. These are everyone else. These are not people who are professional advocates or lobbyists or politicians and a lot of these people are kids. Like when I was out there this weekend, and I wasn't there for any of the fire burning or participating in any of that, but a lot of the people who are out here, for one thing, are kids, right? So they don't have a level of political power. They cannot vote. They cannot run for public office. You have to be a certain age to do that. In addition to that, there are some folks very much like Jared echoed who were not there for George Floyd or even Black Lives Matter, quite frankly. I saw some folks who looked to be like animal rights activists. I saw a lot of people who were very upset in general for lots of different reasons, who just wanted to cause chaos because they thought, again, the police are under close watch right now and the police are relatively reserved right now. And I'm just going to go ahead and go out there and live stream and take advantage of an opportunity and maybe be a headline. You know, the police are on one end, you know, the whole crowd is on the other end, and they're just kind of in the middle, trying to see how far they can throw it and chucking water balls, et cetera. It's a bigger conversation about qualified immunity. You know, I think we talked about this before. I don't believe in immunity for anyone's occupation. I just think, you know, the legal system is designed so that if a case is completely frivolous, a grand jury is supposed to determine that. There won't be enough grounds to bring charges, and I think that that's kind of enough of a safety net. You know, I don't really, you know, police have qualified immunity. That's one thing. Graham versus Connor, which was a Supreme Court decision, kind of determined that even if a police officer is wrong, they're granted the level of qualified immunity when they make mistakes like confusing a cell phone for a gun. I think those sorts of rulings are very dangerous and are partly why we're here. But beyond that, prosecutors bring these charges. Prosecutors are the people who can determine, you know, like we talked about third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. That's a prosecutor's decision. They have a big role to play in the justice system, and they have next to no oversight whatsoever, for one. And they have something called absolute immunity, not qualified like a police officer, but absolute immunity, which means that whether it's a civil liability or a criminal liability, they cannot be found liable. They have a total shield of legal protection, which to me is just, I mean, it only started happening in the 70s, but it's completely unconstitutional. It breaks all of the rules about determining whether or not someone should be charged for a crime if you can, you know, skirt around the law. You know, you're the keeper of the law, but you're also not held to it. That's a double standard to me. And you and I talk about this all the time. If we break a law on accident or on purpose, we're still held to it. And we don't even know it. We're not even lawyers. So why should the state's lawyers be immune from the law? There's a lot of questions there, but what I will say is that the experience that I had, even cleaning up, which I cleaned up over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, was a really great experience. Like I was with all kinds of people. Atlanta is a very diverse city, and we came and I was mostly picking up trash. I didn't have anything to remove paint with, but there are still people out there with signs and with T-shirts, and you know, who are still there for the exact same reason, but we're just a part of the cleanup process. And it really is not. I just had a great experience listening to people who don't look like me, who were completely disgusted with what's been happening and completely empathetic and who completely get it and are not Black and do not share my same pigment. It was actually a really good experience. And I think if people were more active in the protest and they were kind of a part of that, they may not be as you know, put off by what's going on in the media, because the media is looking for problems and they're looking for agitators and they're focusing on agitators. And like when we were out there cleaning, there was not a single camera, not even a local one. So that's just another thing I wanted to throw out. You know, there's some good and there's some healing that I think has happened, at least for me, talking to white Americans who are just like, this is effed up, you know, because you don't get that online so much.
I mean, I think my because, you know, I go real left with things. I'm real analytical, so I go real left with things. And, you know, I've been kind of dissecting the whole weekend. And, you know, a question arose for me. And I was like, you know, I really listening, because, you know what, I really appreciate social media, because social media allows you to really know what a lot of people are thinking all at one time. Because you can watch people's posts, you can go to people's pages. And, you know, the collective that I came up with for a lot of them was, especially my younger people, is, do they really understand the correlation between voting and the people that actually directly affect their everyday life as it pertains to legislation, as it pertains to senators and Congress people? You know, has that correlation really been made? Because I watched a lot of the stuff they said. When some people said some weird things, I went to their pages. And, you know, it got me to think. I was like, you know, I wonder, how are we teaching social studies and government in high school? You know, are we still discussing the three branches? I'm serious. I mean, are we still discussing the three branches of government? You know, are we really helping them, teaching them what is a senator, what is a congressman? You know, how do these things directly affect your communities? Because I'm really wondering, especially when you think about all the budget cuts and what they chip away at. You know, it sounds crazy, but it's something I'm really getting ready to look into.
Jared,
I'm really concerned.
I really want Jared to speak to that, but I also, but if you think about it, there's people that are older than us, that are old enough to be our parents, who can still only recite about 2 talking points and cannot tell you the difference between what's Hillary's fault and what was Obama's fault, and don't understand how any of that works either. I mean, there's still people in the
absolutely agree.
You know, so.
I agree. This younger generation has access to so much information, you know, so they can be, I don't want to say bombarded, but they could be thrown with so much stuff. I'm just curious as to how we teach, and I'm just talking about government and social studies. I'm just curious as to how what are we teaching? It sounds silly, but it's legit. It sounds silly, but it's actually legit. You know, what are we actually teaching in government, especially in districts that are predominantly minority based? How do we teach government? How do we teach social studies? Like, it's the little things I think we overlook that are actually empowerment to it. Because if I hadn't had that basic learning of the three branches of government, you know, my undergrad is pre-law political science. But if I had not had that basic understanding, that knowledge that I got from high school, I would have never been able to make that correlation as to who directly affects my day-to-day life with the bills and legislation that is passed. Who has that say-so? Because I think a lot of them just, who's president, who's sitting president, who dictates what goes on in their spaces, and that's not so. Your local government has more of a say-so than the federal government. And I don't know if a lot of them have been empowered enough to make those decisions. And that, again, I have to do some research, so I'm really curious. But Jared, like Simone said, you know, what's your thoughts? What's up with you sit on that? You know, I know, right?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Millennials have always had, in our Black community, we have had a messaging problem. We've had a communication problem. And it starts from the top. Well, that's the issue. We have no top. We have no leader, you know. And perhaps, you know, this was destined and ordained, because we've got to realize that we don't want the wrong type of leader delivering the wrong type of messaging, which is not what we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with no leader delivering no messaging. I believe that now leaders are beginning to actually come forward. I know this weekend we're doing a really big demonstration that I believe actually now has purpose, because we're focusing on the very prime thing that has been troubling to African Americans and putting us into such a PTSD state of being, you know, being police brutality and white nationalism, really attacking those two very specific things. I mean, we've got other issues that we deal with, you know, with healthcare, we deal with environmental justice, we know what's going on with Flint, but there are two very specific things that I believe that is hitting us to heart, and that is frustrating us at the most, and that's police brutality and white nationalism, and actual, you know, abstinence against those two very particular things. And we have a messaging issue. The first messaging issue, like you mentioned, is in what local government is really all about. You know, we saw it actually with COVID-19, right? Whereas COVID-19 really devastated America in ways that we have not seen since 1918 with the Spanish flu. Economically, it created a distressor. The only difference is that now, 100 years later, we're just a little bit more prepared with our banks being fully funded and people didn't go into a complete frenzy. But we saw how corporate companies were tested to practice corporate social responsibility and not firing its employees and choosing, you know, people over profit. And we saw for the first time how those corporate companies had to make a bold statement, and they had to choose to not fund their CEOs an extra $20 million for that month, and to instead pour it into a fund to pay out its employees for the next 3 months that this pandemic is not solved. We saw the pressures of what millennial visibility is all about. And you're right when you said that millennials have so much access to things. We have so much access that things have become so visible. And so, you know, even with everything that's going on with George Floyd, it's not so much that racism is getting worse, it's just getting recorded because we have so much access. And as long as we have so much access and things are so visible to us, we're going to always want some type of a prime immediate change. But I don't even think it's so much of that. I think that we just need a singular voice. We need a voice that's going to come forward and actually state what the real problem is. The real problem is that we are tired. Yes, we are frustrated, we're sad and everything, but we are tired. I think that's the first thing. We have to, secondly, have a voice that's able to come forth and say, not only do we recognize that we are tired, but that we should be hopeful, because that tiredness has turned into this restlessness, that's turned into this hopelessness, right? It's like, okay, the reason why I'm out here rioting, the reason why I'm out here looting, the reason why I might not even be a violent person, but I just lit a car on fire because I saw somebody else do it. And I mean, my goodness, my brothers are dying, my sisters are dying. What else do I have to lose, right? And so we have to have somebody that's going to rise forward and say, look, there's no need to be hopeless. There is a reason to be hopeful. And this is why, because we're going to address these two things through civil disobedience constructively. We're going to put the passage of legislation in place that's going to protect the citizen and release the type of inflammatory, I guess you could say, structures and boundaries, pillars that are in place to protect police officers over people. And we're going to do these things, and we're going to demand it city by city by city. The same way that Congress was able to quickly come up with the CARES Act, you know, a couple of months ago, right, is the same way that's the reason why I started the Tired movement that we're starting this weekend, because I said, you know, we can have a Tired Act, you know, and this act, we're going to very particularly focus on police brutality and white nationalism. But I think that a voice needs to come forward to actually make that very clear and to tell people what to do. People are rioting because they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do with their money. They don't know what to do with their time that they have on their hands right now. They don't know what to do with their minds that are just running at 1,000 miles per minute. People don't know what to do with their energy because they know that they want to do something, but and if you just got people that just don't know what to do and nobody's standing forward and saying, all right, these are the 10 different ways that you can be involved in this movement so that we can get this police brutality taken care of, and we can get, because the thing is, you cannot stop a police officer from killing you. Yep. The only thing that we can do is put the preventive measures in place to ensure that if a police officer does think about killing you, he's going to think twice because of what he knows may happen to him. And right now, police officers are not thinking twice because they know that they'll be all right. Mm-hmm. So we have a messaging problem because we have a leadership problem. And whereas I admire Black Lives Matter for everything that they've done for the past 8 years, the biggest problem with Black Lives Matter is that as a modern civil rights organization, they are anti-leadership. They are anti-putting somebody up at the forefront. So guess what happens when you have anti-leadership? You got 10,000 people out there protesting and they can't tell you what they want. If you sit down with 100 of them and say, what do you want? Well, we want police brutality to stop. How? Well, we want them to stop killing us. How? We want them, well, What do you want them specifically to do?
Or it'll be somebody else who says F Trump. Or it'll be somebody else who says stop eating meat.
It's like,
so
okay,
let me ask you
know.
So let me ask this. Do you think, and I think this is one of the issues that I see, because I'm older than both of y'all, I think one of the issues that I'm seeing is there's also an issue of controlling the narrative. You know, I think that past administrations have been able to control the narrative, meaning everybody's not talking to you at once. We have one qualified voice, or we have one designated person who is going to distribute COVID-19 information. This person has been endowed. They understand the dynamics of it. They're the one leading the research team. This is the one person that we're empowering to speak to everybody as it pertains to COVID-19. You know, I honestly think that Trump's own creation is biting him in the behind, which is this alternate facts thing. You know, the theory that he introduced that, you know, oh, well, alternate facts, and, you know, you can say this, you can say that. You know, there's a difference between free speech and just excitement language. You know, people talking to get people into their emotions. You know, people saying things because they know to get a rise out of you. So, you know, I think it boils down to controlling the narrative. And I think that's one of the major issues we're seeing as well, that everybody.
Yeah, but Jared hit that right on the head as well, because when you think about Black Lives Matter, if I'm watching CNN or something, I may see one of the founders, but I can't tell you their names. I can't. And when people are out there and they've all got Black Lives Matter signs, again, they're all saying different things. So again, it's definitely leadership messaging. That's all. I mean, the narrative comes from the messaging, and messaging is supposed to come from a single source, or at least a unified body of sources. So I get the idea. I think the intent was probably democratization, right? That a movement can't belong to, you know, to one person. I mean, I'm sure that was the intent, but the outcome could definitely be exactly this, right? Is that there are some folks who just, you know, abolish the police, right? What does that look like, right? And is that the goal? Is that the problem? And I think everything you said, Jared, was just so spot on. Is that either when folks have no political power and they can't change things, or when they're just so frustrated and they don't know what else to do, that's exactly how riots and things like that happen. And there are policy solutions, and they do exist. You know, I think traditionally government is slow, very slow. The justice system is usually slow, very slow. But when there's urgency, again, like the CARES Act, they can pass major pieces of legislation when they're backed up against the wall, and they absolutely have to, and they know that they can't really sleep at night or sleep soundly without doing it. So, you know, I guess.
And move money.
Right, exactly.
and put money behind it. I mean, when you think about it, having to have moved trillions of dollars, right, into a passage of legislation, and then actually moving it from administration to from the SBA to the IRS and the whole. I mean, this can easily be possible. And that's the reason why right now, in the spirit of George Floyd, you know, because, you know, to be very honest with you, you know, I'm a student of Martin Luther King Jr., right? I'm a King Jr. now, but I'm a student of the movement in the 50s and 60s. I was sitting back to first do what Dr. King told us to do, which is information gathering. I was trying to figure out, first of all, what is the emotion of our people? Because I think this is something that we just never really figured out. You know, how do we feel? And then, you know, Dr. King said that we have to, secondly, in the second step, we have education, you know, mass education. I said, wow, a lot of people really don't know what it is that they want. But, you know, if we can really garnish all of the energy of the folks that are out there right now, and that will go back out there, you know, we can actually do this and do this effectively. To what you said, Ricardo, one thing you mentioned is about the messaging of the administration. You're absolutely right. This administration is ludicrous, you know. I believe in not attacking people. I believe in attacking oppressive policies and forces and evils. But in this particular case, you've got it actually completely entwined and entangled with one man who's chosen to be so narcissistic in the way that he feels and lives and moves and have his being, that it has polarized our community in more ways than seldom. I do think that we have to caution because, you know, as a Black community rather, we used to not lean towards the government for a narrative. And we need to go back to that place, you know. And that's where actually the millennials are right now, because millennials are not watching CNN. Millennials and Gen Z are not watching MSNBC or Fox News. They're watching the Shade Room. They're watching Twitter. They're watching, Instagram and TikTok. And to be honest with you, our community needs to get back to that. We need to centralize and put pressure on our African-American influencers who have the most following and the most clout on social media to communicate the messaging that we need to hear, and no longer give the president what he wants. What the president of the United States wants is us to be agitated by the things that he says. I've gotten to the point with that man where I don't care what he says, because what he says now at this point has no impact on me. And the more that we feed into it, and I've told even elders this, people who are in their 60s and 70s who are constantly calling me, telling me what the president says. I said, turn your television off. He wants you to get so agitated at what he says. He is a communication genius. And he wants you to get so agitated at what he says that you talk about it on his social media. He has grown 40 million followers on Twitter since he started office. He wants us to follow him. He loves the fact that he can tweet something and get a couple 100,000 tweets in a matter of an hour or two. Unfollow this man. I know plenty of people that I don't follow this man. I know plenty of people that follow him just because we need to unfollow him. We need to not pay attention to the White House. Let those numbers go down of viewership on Facebook when the White House goes on a press conference. There's nothing that man has to say. Not one single thing. If we really think about it, not one thing that he said in the past 3 months with this COVID-19 that impacted us in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Not one single thing.
Let me ask you this, because you alluded to, and this was my question. So over the weekend, and it was kind of funny, I agree with you. Memes, and I think me being 40, I've still gotten accustomed to like watching memes and the stuff they actually come up with. Y'all are quite creative. Everybody has gotten so creative. But my question was, when stuff seems to happen in Atlanta, Keisha seems to go to T.I. and Killer Mike. I'm trying to make the correlation, and maybe it goes back to what you just said, the influencers and stuff. So I'm gonna ask you directly: do you feel like that's effective when she gets a T.I. and a Killer Mike versus the Gathering Spot guys, or versus the president of the Urban League? Do you feel like her getting Killer Mike and T.I. is more effective? Because I've been trying to make that correlation in my head.
I don't believe that it was effective at all. I love our mayor. I love T.I. I love Killer Mike. I do not believe that it is effective to bring them to the table for a press conference and telling folks to go home. I don't believe that the mayor should have told people to go home at all. In fact, what I believe that the mayor and the other leaders there should have said is, I know I cannot stop you from doing what you feel is right, but I pray that you're safe and that you stay safe as you go forth and do what you feel is right. I pray that you do not resort to violence, because violence is not the answer, and left it right at that. When she didn't do that, that's when the agitation began. When she did the complete opposite by getting out there and telling folks to go home and that we are a disgrace to the city and that Atlanta doesn't deal with these problems, I get what she was trying to say, that we don't have some of the same problems that other cities have, but we still do have problems like that. And we literally saw that the day before yesterday when a Spelman student and a Morehouse student yanked out the car, tased, and they weren't even protesting. They were just driving by shortly afterwards in the curfew, or after the curfew, right? So you can't say that this city does not have this problem. And when you say certain things to a tired people, it agitates them. It makes them even more angry. And that's exactly what happened. Folks got angry. Folks got so angry at what was happening. And I don't blame them. But I wish that they would not have done what they've done. I hope that they stop doing what they're doing and looting and violence. but I don't blame them. I don't believe that Killer Mike and T.I. helped it. I believe that perhaps they actually made it worse. What's the rationale behind it, though? The rationale behind it that I believe that our mayor had was in bringing folks to the table that she feels were socially conscious and had the ear of the people. But you know what that really goes to show? It shows that she, unfortunately, in her tenure as mayor for the past few years, has actually been more disconnected from the people than perhaps what she thought that she was. Because if she was as connected to the people as she assumed for her to be, she wouldn't have called Killer Mike or T.I. or the president of the Urban League or any of those particular people. She would have perhaps called Lil Baby or 21 Savage or Cardi B, folks who live here in this city who can speak the language of the young folks there. Had a conversation with them about what she is willing to do to protect the citizens that are out there protesting, while also ensuring that public and private property is being held to the highest standard. And then perhaps folks might have went home eventually and not went out there and looted and rioted. I believe that press conference made things worse. If you look at even the timestamp of when that happened, it made it so much worse.
Yeah, I think I hear your point about the artists that were used there for sure. I mean, I really loved what Killer Mike had to say. However, I think if anything, and again, even when we were there cleaning up, nobody was blaming the protesters, period. Nobody was out there on some, I can't believe this stuff, and this is, what are these, all kind of names calling or whatever. Like, it wasn't like that. It was like, this is our city. We get it. We're in our BLM t-shirts, and we're just cleaning up. There was no animosity or no, go home. We said the same thing. We'll be back out here tomorrow. If they do it again, we'll be back out here tomorrow. That's just not the spirit of it, because we feel like we get where the frustration comes from. However, I do think that the timestamp was very interesting. When I was out there, I just felt like, you know what? I believe in citizens again, but when there's no one to listen to and there's no specific directive, like the organization that came or the folks who had planned it had a plan from beginning to end, but it didn't dissolve. It didn't end clearly. It's like the folks who were there who wanted to plan it went home, and all the people who came and showed up around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in their purge masks and their anonymous masks, they just got there. The party was just getting started, and there was no plan, and there was no leadership for it. And I felt like announcing a 9 p.m. curfew, at 2 or 3 p.m. over the weekend, when people had already been out there since the morning, and then shutting down MARTA at 9 p.m. when you want people to go home, but then they have no transpo to get home. None of that made sense to me. Logistical sense to me. I mean, and again, it is a tense environment. It is this close. When people are out there and they're sharing the megaphone and everybody's getting to say what they got to say to get it all out, it was productive and it was constructive, even in the multiple places it happened. But the second it became a little bit of agitation, a little bit of force, a little bit of, that kind of like degradation of what they were out there to do, then it was just like a spark. That was really all it took. At least that's what I picked up on and noticed. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I don't even think that people weren't even waiting on it. It's just that it happened. And then when it happened, it was like, oh, really? That's what you have to say? We're out here as young people, and this is how we feel, and that's what you have to say? No. We're not going to allow you to.
What do you think? I kind of think they should have been down there.
What do you say?
I kind of think they should have been down there. My first thought was, had I not already gone home, I wouldn't have even seen it. I just happened to have already gone home. I just turned 30, so I go to bed earlier. But I was thinking if I was still out there, I wouldn't have even seen any of that. I'm not on my, I'm thinking I'm not on my phone watching the news when I'm out there. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just a total disconnect. And that message may have been for the city, but it wasn't for the people down there. And I really think they should have just been physically present. I think it would have made all the difference in the world for them to be just physically present. Yep,
absolutely. And I mean, the very fact that she called the National Guard, that it wasn't even the governor's decision to, remit the National Guard, but that she, as a Black mayor of a Black city for the most part, called the National Guard. It was very distasteful. It was very, very distasteful. It's very distasteful, me driving up and down the street throughout downtown and midtown and uptown, and seeing these men who, and I've spoken with several people who are actually in the National Guard who are like, I don't want to arrest my people. I don't want to shoot my people for getting out there and protesting peacefully just because it's 9:30. You know, I have friends that are so perplexed with what they should do, and they are a part of the force. They are a part of the National Guard. What should I do? You know, it is so distasteful. I commend the young people that went out there. I wish that they would have been more organized, but I commend them because it shows that the flame of justice, or that the flame of justice is still lit. It's still on fire. You know, we just need someone to speak up, and we need to do something. You know, we need to really do something to address these ills, these sociological ills, and really put us in a place where we can take a step towards freedom. Coretta Scott King once said that struggle is a never-ending process, that freedom is never really won, but that you have to earn it and that you have to win it in every generation. Well, we as a generation have to figure out what is the freedom that we're going to win, you know, in this generation. The generation of the baby boomers won the freedom of desegregation, you know. You know, what is going to be our freedom? I believe that our freedom that we can win is the freedom of police brutality. You know, the freedom of white nationalism. I believe that we can win that freedom. I believe that we can win that freedom through legislation. I believe that we can win that freedom through eventually generation to generation changing the hearts of people. Because gratefully, as generations are passing, you know, we look at back in 1967, a poll was made that how many white people had black friends? The percentage was 16%. 2020, how many white people have black friends? 87%. We've come a long way. The contrast between then and now is significant and strong because we have been able to, I believe, change the hearts of white people in this country. And as you mentioned about some of the white people that you were with yesterday and the day before that, as you were cleaning the city, you know, how they feel. They're very, they're not just sympathetic, because I don't want a bunch of people being sympathetic to me, but they are empathetic. They truly are seeking to understand. They have no problem with reparations. You know, they're just trying to figure out what they can do to move in that step of reparations. You know, and so they have no problem with taking that extra step. And for the folks who are still resistant to that, you know, we just need to ignore them for right now, focus on what we can do, and put the pressure. Because the thing about it is, it's customization. I wish that I knew the climate back in the 60s when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 64 and in 65. I am more than sure that the majority of the folks, the white folks during that time, were not okay with that act being passed. And they're not going, and the few folks, right? Because we're not dealing with 1960s. The few folks who, and when I say few, of course, it's more than just a few, but, you know, proportionately, the few folks who are not going to be okay with the way they move and pass legislation to protect us from the police and white nationalism, they're going to be okay with that as well. But you know what? Generation by generation, it's going to get better and better and better. 10 years from now, we fix this issue today. 10 years from now, it's going to get better. You know, that new generation that's going to come about is hold themselves to it. That many white Americans today are definitely holding themselves to a higher standard.
So let's segue to you, because you about like us. We could do this all day. You about like me and Simone. We could do this all day. Let's segue to you, because I do have to write a feature out of it. So let me ask you. You know, we have a conversation, and I understand it better because I work with a lot of young people all the time, from the interns to all these other people that I work with. So I guess my question to you is, because you've been doing this since you were 5. I mean, preaching and traveling and all that good stuff. You know, how did you answer the call of leadership? Like, how were you able to do that? Because I think that's what the other generations are keep trying to say, is that we don't understand Generation Z. They don't seem to be interested in much of anything. And yet I know that's not true. But you managed to answer that call, and you answered that call since you were about 5 years old. So
22.
how were you able to answer that call? How were you able to recognize it at your age, at a very young age, when there's so much noise around you guys? Because, we have to acknowledge you guys have access to so much information, and deciphering, what you can use and what's not for you is a hard process. Even adults can't do it. So how were you able to hear that amongst all the noise that is going on in the society you grew up in?
The truth is, actually, I didn't until recent years consider myself to be a leader, nor did I consider myself to be a follower. I just considered myself to be moving in my purpose. Because I think that sometimes it can take a little bit of external influence to convince someone, even the most confident of those like myself, because I've always been confident, to actually step into leadership roles. Because most of the time, those type of people like myself are in leadership roles and then don't even know it. Because anytime that you're helping someone, anytime that you're actually guiding someone from step A to step B, whether it's a parent guiding a child on a bicycle to go from here to there, or whether it's, you stepping into a new phase or a new moment in your life, whatever the particular means may be, that right there does make you a leader. I just think that a lot of times we don't realize that leadership is within us because we have a tainted perspective of what leadership is. I definitely did for a while, until I realized that I've actually been moving in my purpose for a long time. And that because I've been moving in my purpose for a long time, and that folks, and that I was helping people move from one place to the next, that I was a leader. And so when I was younger, 5, 6, 7 years old, preaching the gospel, I was really just moving into my purpose. I knew what my calling was, to actually preach the gospel. I knew that I had a vision that God gave to me to inspire young people to move forward into their next level, to realize that they were empowered to do great things, that age was nothing but a number. And then I believe what stemmed out of that was influence, right? Which I think what happens to most folks who are moving in their purpose, and they're helping folks to get from one place to the other. You have influence over someone. And in this case, I had influence over people. And that influence was something that I did not realize until the more recent years. And when I did begin to realize it, now the next step was me realizing or recognizing, as you mentioned, that I was an actual leader. And I think that recognition can probe you then to actually figure out what is next. What's that new thing that needs to be done out of you? And what vision can you give to the people that are following you, so that way they can help you to reach that particular vision. Leadership can be formative, but leadership, I believe, most of the time is very casual. I believe that most of the time people are not put in positions to be leaders. And then other times people are put in positions to be leaders. Either way, I believe that leadership can be something adapted by millennials and Gen Z all over this country, and by those who are older, those who are in that Gen X or baby boomers generation. I mentor a lot of those as well, helping them to come into their purpose and to be able to really activate the things that are going on in their lives. I believe that leadership can be universal in the form of it being informative or it being casual. Some people are put in positions of leadership, and then some people are leaders that are not in positions of leadership, but they just end up activating that leadership once they realize, oh my God, I've been walking in my purpose this entire time.
Okay, all right. So, because you get to be the subject matter expert today, so you're the Generation Z on the show today. So you have to speak for all of them. I know it's not fair, but that's what we do today. So to those
no problem with it.
Who feel like they cannot reach Generation Z, leaders in business and all these different sectors who keep saying, I don't know what they want, I don't really understand them. What would be your advice to leadership who has privy of a lot of Generation Z? You know, we talked about the communication barrier. What advice would you give them? People who are in leadership and management who are having to deal with a lot of Generation Z. What would be your advice to them?
Loose the expectations, be transparent, and listen. First, you have to loose the expectations. The expectation that most folks in Gen X and the baby boomers have is that folks need to come to them, that the millennials need to come to them, right? When we have, even in church, for example, churches expect for young people to come to the church to end up getting embraced with the church versus the church going out into the community and dealing with the young people there. We have to loose the expectation that they have to work as hard as you do, because it's not true. We live in a totally different generation. I don't even know how I would have made it through high school if I didn't have Google. And I don't have a problem saying that. Well, it was I understand that my generation, I understand that my generation above me, those who are even considered millennials and Gen X, had encyclopedias. I cannot imagine writing papers on typewriters. I cannot imagine getting through college with those things. You know what I mean? I just can't imagine that. And for the elder generation to expect for young people to work as hard as they worked is ludicrous. And that is one of the areas of divide, is that you have to step up to the plate that I am at by doing the things that I did. Absolutely not. Loose the expectations. Can we break into that a little bit more? Because that's so fascinating to me. Can you just explain what you mean by working, like what you mean by working hard? Not like the same, you mean the same tools, or do you mean the same like hours a day, like et cetera? Sure. Well, first of all, we've been so used as African Americans. Well, let me clarify. The generation above us, Gen X and baby boomers, have been so used to this timeline of you go to school, you then graduate from school, you have to go to college, and then you graduate from college, you move into a career and you make your money. The way of making money now, the way of moving into your careers are totally different now. They're totally different. There are folks who are doing things like Forex, making, $20,000 a week at 23, 24 years old. There are folks who are trading cryptocurrency. There are folks who are starting investment firms at a young age. And so the path is just not the same. Our generation is not even interested in investing into stocks. We're interested in investing into lucrative markets. The way that we do things are just straight up different. The way that we are is just straight up different. And so the path to success is different. Who would have thought 20 years ago that Amazon, who would have thought 20 years ago that Amazon, right, would have been as successful as it is today? Here it is, J.C. Penney's just filed for bankruptcy. Sears and other companies are closing down as we know it, right? But Amazon is thriving, because times are just changing. So the expectation that a millennial or that a Gen Z needs to step up to the plate that they are at, follow the same path that they follow, right? And this goes for every route. I can attest to it for ministry, right? People can attest to it for business, for health, for principal pathways, finance, etc. There are folks who don't have to go to school to get a finance degree in order for them to be a finance guru, And then when the generation above us tries to convince us of that, it becomes like it makes them seem ignorant, because you've got folks like Jay-Z, who is a billionaire at this particular point, and he didn't go to school. You've got folks like Tyler Perry, who is also a multi-billionaire, mega influencer, and we can argue to even say is more influential than some of the Black folks who have money, right? But are not at that particular level. You know, young people, we know what we want, but we know what we want as far as one thing. We want to be influential, or we want to be wealthy, you know, and we have to be able to, and some people want both. And we have to push as a Generation X and the baby boomers, they have to push folks past where they are. And that's where they have to loosen the expectations. And then there goes the transparency, because it ties to it. That selfishness has got to go. We got to move from selfishness to selflessness. Let's truly help our people. Let's truly help the next generation. You know, let's really put our money where our mouths are, you know, and not just help young people in the way that we feel as an older generation, right? Speaking from their perspective, that we feel as though, you know, we can help them the best. No, help them in the way that they need the help. You know, help them in the way that they need the help, not in the way that you, I mean, how many times have we seen over the course of the past 10, 20 years, young leaders start movement that they asked very specific help out of elders that only helped them in a completely opposite way? Then now the elders are trying to catch up with the young leaders, because the young leaders took what they got, flipped it, just like the momentum that's behind our generation can do, turn it into something bigger and better than the elders that helped them out. If they would have helped them out in the way that they needed to help them out, they would have had their attention, they would have had their ear, and their influence would have been strong. But we're not helping out folks in the way, we're not being transparent, we're not letting folks know the hurdles. Because perhaps, now don't get me wrong, there is a listening problem out of the millennial generation too. You know, we don't listen to our elders, right? We don't listen to our elders on things like you mentioned, Ricardo, voting. But there's a reason why we don't listen to our elders about voting. Because unfortunately, just like you mentioned, there is no transparency. There's a communication issue about voting. So then what happens is, if I'm trying to start something, if I'm trying to build something up, whether it's a movement or a business or whatever it is that I've got going on, you know, and if I'm coming to an elder that's in their, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, and I'm asking them for advice, I don't want them to tell me to keep on keeping on just a little while longer. I need them to tell me very specifically,
I don't know why.
What are the things? Keep on keeping on just a little while longer. My God. You know, it's like, that's not particularly what I want to hear. What I want to hear are the hurdles that you specifically had to get over. I want to hear, what are the things that you said to this person to get them to do what they did. I want to hear the story. You know, I don't want to hear vague examples, and I don't want to hear encouragement. I want to hear details. Young people want to be put to work. Young people are not as lazy as people think they are. You know, there are a few that are blatantly lazy. They want to be put to work. They want to know, what do I need to do to take my life? Young people now are because we are so driven by social media, we want to get the best of the best Jordans, like the stupid Jordans that came out last weekend, and everything else, that, you know, we will work so hard to get to what we need to get. You know what I mean? We will, you put young people to work, put them on a program, put them on a path to greatness, they will get it done. It's only when they are discouraged or when they feel misled and not being transparent with, that they end up being pushed away. And then the elder generation has to listen, because this is a prime example of everything going on with George Floyd. Now, the elder generation is not listening. They're not very particularly listening to the cries of young people. They're not listening. And if you're not listening, then, you know, you're not going to be able to receive what it is, and you're not going to be able to act on what's being received. And at the root of all of that is that transparency, because, see, when young people are out there on the streets protesting And when you've got 1 million people in Atlanta and 1,600 police officers, or 800 people in Minnesota, 800 police officers in Minnesota, but 500,000 people in Minnesota, then you're dealing with a situation where who has the real power? The folks that are on the street. If you don't step down your standards and listen to them, because you have to, you're gonna have a real ball on your hands. You know, I told somebody a long time ago, because I'm pretty sure you saw what just came out, yesterday or the day before that. It was the worst news I think I have ever seen in the past couple of years, that the federal government, through Trump, just announced Antifa as a terrorist organization. I told somebody a few years ago, if the government doesn't start listening, and if we don't do better at communicating our messaging, America is on the verge of a race riot. And with Antifa being declared a terrorist organization, that's them essentially declaring Black Lives Matter a terrorist organization. And it's only a matter of time. Trump is just waiting on it. I've been watching those tweets, and those tweets are like statements from the 1960s. If y'all don't get in your houses, we about to shoot you. I mean, he tweeted it. He said it. We're on the verge of a race riot if we don't get it together. If the elders don't start listening, and the Black leaders like our mayor here in Atlanta don't start listening and paying attention, and if we don't do better at communicating, we're going to be on the verge of a race riot. And it's not fair, because we fought too hard to end up getting to that place.
Yeah, I think, Ricardo, and you too, Jared, one of the things I'm kind of picking up from all of this is twofold. I think in some senses, as a people, not even as a people, maybe this is just in general, you know, social media and technology have changed a lot, but I see the same criticisms about young people being as emotional as they are as I do from a lot of older folks that I observe on social media, because nobody just admits this is the way these algorithms work. Is that, you know, we feed each other these videos all day long, sharing and sharing and sharing over and over and over again. You can only watch a man get killed so many times before something inside of your brain just kind of snaps. And we share it with one another, and look at this, and look at that, and look at this, and look at that. And there is a sense of like, it's really, it's not that it's not real, but the truth is that it makes everything far, far darker than way darker than it might otherwise be. And the same thing is happening on the other end, when people who are on the other side of the aisle are watching looters and Black people doing this, or brown people doing that, or Black people doing this, or you know, watching some Black people burn a flag, or watching some brown people, you know, so they're feeding themselves as well. And I find older generations are equally susceptible, you know, to that. As when it's entertaining, when it's shocking, we share it and we share it and we share it and we share it and we share it, and that becomes the narrative, to where the next time you see somebody who looks like that, you already associate them with a party, you associate them with all these things. On the other end, I do feel like the younger generation has picked up on a couple of things that are really important. One of them is that this idea that Black people do not need to be better than or perfect victims. And I think when I think about the last time that these sorts of things happened, or at least when I think about the 60s and 50s, I really think about Black people living lives that were so exceptional in so many ways, in the sense that like we nurtured our family units and we believed in those. We believed in education and getting as much education as possible, getting the best grades possible, being model citizens. There was so much to deal with, even as a model Black citizen. I mean, I remember like my father talked about this. I said, well, Dad, why don't you speak Geechee if your family, you know, if they were Creole? And he said, well, it was hard enough being Black in the South, let alone being Black in the South and speaking another language. You didn't want any other reason for people to come for you. And I think that there's an older generation that believes, you know, not just in civil disobedience, but in almost a model victim. Like when the situation in Central Park happened recently, you know, that guy had a Harvard education. You know, Ahmaud Arbery or even some of these other folks, like, well, they were veterans, or they were this, or they were that. But you don't have to be all those things. And I think this generation has really picked up on the fact that even if I am less than perfect, even if I have made a mistake before, even if I had gotten F's in school, even if you can look up a picture of me where I'm, you know, pulling out my middle finger, I'm a human being. I have value, and you have absolutely no right to execute me. And if all you're going to do is dig through everything that's wrong with me, than really like forget the system, like F the system, tear it all. And I do think that has been a sticking point because, and the media is partly responsible for this, but I do think old generations do just believe that there's a level at which you are to comport yourself. And I do think that younger generations are increasingly debunking that idea. I'm not going to comport anything to be treated with the respect that I believe I ought to be treated with in this country. I do think that that's a very clear distinction. And that in that sense, I kind of do see progress kind of happening.
You bring up such a good point because our culture is so much different now, where the way that we see our lives and our humanity is just totally different. And it's disturbing, to say the least, in one sense, and then enlightening in another sense, because, over the course of us being in this country for 400 years and everything that we've gone through, you ask, 100 black men around this city of Atlanta, or 1,000 black men around this country, what does it mean to be a black man? And you're going to get 100 different responses. You're going to get 1,000 different responses. And that's really problematic, because if our culture is to be different from just the Caucasian race, which it is, our culture is complete with everything except one thing. Our culture, we've got music, we've got our lingo, we've got, you all have seen on Twitter and Facebook and everything, these little acronyms people been making. Y'all better not, I'm talking about when Brian Kemp, YBTCH, wub, da 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 da. And the very fact that all of us can read that same thing and read it and get it, y'all, that is a culture, right? And so our culture is complete in everything, except we don't have a rite of passage. We used to when we were in Africa. I go to Africa all the time. And when I go to Africa, I see this rite of passage that is existent in cultures there. But what happened when we came over here? We lost our rite of passage. There is no definition of what it means to be a black man. There's no definition of what it means to be a black woman, and it becomes such a divisive thing because, you'll hear sometimes women say, oh, you're not a woman until you have kids. What? What about the women who don't have children? Does that mean that she's not a woman too? So what does it mean to be a woman? It means something. It means something to be a man. But, here's the thing. If we don't end up eventually establishing a rite of passage among black people, we're going to continue to be polarized among each other, because what's happening is we have so much access as a millennial and Gen Z generation. We're going to try to figure out what that is from everybody that we have access to. So the news is telling us this is what it looks like to be a black man. Our principals at school are telling us this is what it looks like to be a black man. Our fathers are telling us this, and then the president is telling us that, and then our artists are telling us this. And I mean, it's just, we're just figuring it all out from everybody.
Well, what you said is actually the perception. That you take something from here, you take something from there, and then you create your own ideology, your own perception of what it means to do something. But I guess in that moment, that kind of, and I know I'm gonna get crucified for this, but Simone knows where I stand on this. I kind of have that gripe. Well, it brings up the question about how fast do we change? Because I think what you're saying is that things have changed so dramatically that I don't feel like we caught up. We stayed with the times. And I have this discussion about HBCU. I love them. I understand why they were created. I was around when, they were highfalutin and they were working and walking in purpose. But I've also watched them stay in the same place, a lot of them in the same place, and not really change to fit the needs of our African American people. Their curriculums didn't really change. The way they handled, these young people didn't change. And I think what we're seeing now, we're seeing the fruits of that. A lot of them are saying, I've talked to a lot of them, interviewed some of them, and, they're saying, well, people aren't coming, or they're not giving, or, the ideology of the Black experience. And my question to them is, because I didn't go to HBCU, but my question to them is, what is the Black experience? Like, you guys should be able to define that for them, because that's what you guys are saying you're built on, is that you come to HBCU, or a Black experience. Well, what is a Black experience? And if you as an institution of higher learning can't define that for the next generation, who can? Who can? So I guess that's kind of, when you said that, that kind of resonated with me, because I think that is where we sit at that. What is, and I'll say, what is the Black experience? Because it can't just be music. It can't just be, hairstyles. It's got to be something substantial that we build on. And it's funny when you say rite of passage, because in my generation, getting a degree was a rite of passage. It was something that you had a big cookout about. It was something that it was a big deal when you sent out your invitations that you were graduating with a bachelor's. When you had a baby, it was a big deal because, we had full households. So when two people get married and have a baby, oh my God, we're doing a baby shower. We didn't do that gender reveal stuff, but we're having a baby shower.
What would your family have said if you were like, I'm not going to school, I'm day trading. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm not going to school though. I don't need people to say, what if that, like?
That you would have got this look like, what do you mean? What do you mean? But the funny thing is, the unification seemed to have been a little easier because our narrative was controlled, and not in a bad way. When you think about the way we were set up, and I always love to use the example when it came to education. The African American community was unified on the ideology that in order to level the playing field, we needed to have a degree. In my day, I'm 40. We needed to have a degree. So we set our own Black agenda, and that agenda resonated within the community. So when we said education was priority, media was on board, businesses were on board, families was on board. So you saw a different world be created. You saw Cosby Show lead into a different world where they create. I didn't find out that Hillman was not real until I got into my 30s. I can't even lie. I did not know Hillman was not real because they conceptualized what education looked like, and they made it fun, and they made it something we wanted to do. We wanted to go to Hillman. We wanted to have those experiences. But when our leaders sat down and set the Black agenda, it resonated throughout the community. And everybody, every industry, and everything was on one page. And I think I agree with Jared that is primarily the issue. We don't know what the Black experience is because nobody kept up. Things kept changing. Our kids kept changing. People started making decisions on our behalf. We started sitting back going, well, that don't really bother me. That don't affect me. And I think now we're seeing the fruits of that. It did affect us. So I told somebody out there, I was like, now we're sitting around going, well, wait, when did that happen? Who passed that bill? How is that even law? They were doing it when you were watching Love and Hip Hop. They were doing it when you were twerking in the club. They were making these decisions. And a lot of people kept saying, well, I don't understand what that means. That don't affect me. Let's keep doing what we're doing. Now we're here, and we're trying to figure out how we got here. So I absolutely agree with you. And until we can define what the Black experience is and refine how we have these moments that are significant to our community and set the pace for where we're going and how we're going to get there, I think we can continue to have a problem. And I applaud the other ethnicities that have joined in the fight with us. But at our core, we have to be able to say, this is what we want, this is what we need, and we have a team that has been working on what you guys can do to make this happen. And until we can have this twofold fight, I don't know what's going to happen after these riots and everything are over, but I don't know what's going to happen. So, but that's a good place to stop because we'll be here all day. And, I want to say this was as good as I knew it was going to be because, like I said, I've been watching this young man for about 5 years. So this is as good as I knew it was going to be. So definitely shout out to Mr. Sawyer for being with us on today and bringing us amazing, absolutely amazing insight to us. You said things I didn't even realize. And I work with young people all the time. But you said things I didn't even realize. So I'm so thankful for that. And I'm sure that the watchers and the listeners are as well. So kudos to you, sir. Continue to do what you are doing. Simone, any final thoughts?
No, none at all. Just don't forget June 9th is the primary. You can early vote if you haven't early voted, but don't sleep on that election. It's a big election. It's not just Democratic primaries. It's your judges, your DAs, your sheriffs, all the people we've been talking about this past week. So,
Jared, any final thoughts before we check out a Facebook link?
Thank you so much for having me. And for anybody that's watching, they can go on IamTired.org, and in about an hour, we'll be launching our movement.
Oh, shoot. Tell everybody how to get in touch with you. Right,
oh, yes. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Jared Sawyer Jr. And that's JaredSawyer.
All right, everybody. So there you have it. You guys stick around. I'm going to end this live, but y'all stick around for a minute. And we will see you on Friday. On Friday, we have Jackie Roberts, who is the president and CEO. I hope I get this right because I'm not looking at it. Of the National Association of African American Restaurants and Nightclubs. So we're going to look at, we're going to dispel all these rumors about how to start a restaurant, how to start a nightclub, what does it look like since COVID. It's going to be a really good, interesting conversation. So we will see you guys on Friday, same time, same place, 12 o'clock sharp, on the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Wright.